brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Check out their brand new Dino sound slippers. Slippers make a roaring sound every 3 steps. Made with green scaly fabric, soft plush uppers, foam footbeds, non-slip grips on soles, and 3 white claws on each foot. One size fits most up to women's 10.5, men's 9. Footbed measures 10.5. Black Clock Audio Tales is a daily podcast that reads you a story, either a chapter of a novel or a whole short story. Join us in our exploration of old ghost stories, supernatural fiction, horror tales, folk tales, fantasy, gothic horror, weird fiction, and cosmic horror. And don't forget to join us for our monthly show about the Cthulhu Mythos. Look for our podcast near the old wishing well in the blasted heath, wherever you find your podcasts. We suggest Podbean or Apple Podcasts. Find us on the web at pgttcm.com and at Black Clock Audio on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and Black Clock Audio Tales on YouTube. Welcome to Black Clock Audio Tales. Check out our new website over at www.pgttcm.com. Edited by Daniel Spitzer, music by Kevin MacLeod. The Chamber, Oppressive Gloom, Despair. Welcome to Part 1, Folklore of Great Britain.
Join us at the end of the month when we talk about the great old ones.
The Black Bull of Norroway. In bygone days, long centuries ago, there lived a widowed queen who had 3 daughters. And this widowed queen was so poor, and had fallen upon such evil days, that she and her daughters had often much ado to get enough to eat. So the eldest princess determined that she would set out into the world to seek her fortune, and her mother was quite willing that she should do so. "For," said she, "'tis better to work abroad than to starve at hame." But as there was an old henwife living near the castle who was said to be a witch, and to be able to foretell the future, the queen sent the princess to her cottage, before she set out on her travels, to ask her in which of the 4 arts she ought to go in order to find the best fortune. "Thou needest gang nae further than my back door, hinny," answered the old dame, who had always felt very sorry for the queen and her pretty daughters, and was glad to do them a good turn. So the princess ran through the passage to the henwife's back door and peeped out, and what should she see but a magnificent coach drawn by 6 beautiful, cream-colored horses coming along the road. Greatly excited at this unusual sight, she hurried back to the kitchen and told the henwife what she had seen. Aweel, ye seen your fortune," said the old woman in a tone of satisfaction, "for that coach and 6 is coming for thee." Sure enough, the coach and 6 stopped at the gate of the castle, and the second princess came running down to the cottage to tell her sister to make haste, because it was waiting for her. Delighted beyond measure at the wonderful luck that had come to her, she hurried home, and saying farewell to her mother and sisters, took her seat within, and the horses galloped off immediately. And I've heard tell that they drew her to the palace of a great and wealthy prince, who married her, but that is outside my story. A few weeks afterwards, the second princess thought that she would do as her sister had done, and go down to the henwife's cottage, and tell her that she too was going out into the world to seek her fortune, and of course in her heart of hearts she hoped that what happened to her sister would happen to her also. And curious to say, it did, for the old henwife sent her to look out at her back door, and she went, and lo and behold, another coach and 6 was coming along the road. And when she went and told the old woman, she smiled upon her kindly, and told her to hurry home, for the coach and 6 was her fortune also, and that it had come for her. So she too ran home and got into her grand carriage, and was driven away, and of course after all these lucky happenings, the youngest princess was anxious to try what her fortune might be. So the very night, in high good humor, she tripped away down to the old witch's cottage. She too was told to look out at the back door, and she was only too glad to do so, for she fully expected to see a third coach and 6 coming rolling along the high road straight for the castle door. But, alas and alack, no such sight greeted her eager eyes, for the high road was quite deserted, and in great disappointment she ran back to the henwife to tell her so. "Then it is clear that thy fortune is not coming to meet thee this day," said the old dame, "so thou must e'en come back to-morrow." So the little princess went home again, and next day she turned up once more at the old wife's cottage. But once more she was disappointed, for although she looked out long and eagerly, no glad sight of a coach and six, or of any other coach, greeted her eyes. On the third day, however, what should she see but a great black bull, coming rushing along the road, bellowing as it came, and tossing its head fiercely in the air. In great alarm the little princess shut the door, and ran to the henwife to tell her about the furious animal that was approaching. "Hech, hinny!" cried the old woman, holding up her hands in dismay, "and who would have thought that the Black Bull of Norroway would be your fate?" At the words the poor little maiden grew pale. She had come out to seek her fortune, but it had never dawned upon her that her fortune could be anything so terrible as this. "But the bull cannot be my fortune!" she cried in terror. "I cannot go away with a bull." "But ye'll need to," replied the henwife calmly, "for you'll look it out of my door with the intent of meeting your fortune, and when your fortune has come to you, you must just thole it." And when the poor princess ran weeping to her mother to beg to be allowed to stay at home, she found her mother of the same mind as the wise woman, and so she had to allow herself to be lifted up on to the back of the enormous black bull that had come up to the door of the castle, and was now standing there quietly enough. And when she was settled, he set off again on his wild career, while she sobbed and trembled with terror, and clung to his horns with all her might. On and on they went, until at last the poor maiden was so faint with fear and hunger that she could scarce keep her seat. Just as she was losing her hold of the great beast's horns, however, and feeling that she must fall to the ground, he turned his massive head round a little, and speaking in a wonderfully soft and gentle voice, said, "Eat out of my right ear, and drink out of my left ear, so thou wilt be refreshed for thy journey." So the princess put a trembling hand into the bull's right ear, and drew out some bread and meat, which, in spite of her terror, she was glad to swallow, and then she put her hand into his left ear, and found there a tiny flagon of wine, and when she had drunk that, her strength returned to her in a wonderful way. Long they went, and sore they rode, till, just as it seemed to the princess that they must be getting near the world's end, they came in sight of a magnificent castle. "That's where we maun bide this night," said the Black Bull of Norroway, "for that is the house of one of my brothers." The princess was greatly surprised at these words, but by this time she was too tired to wonder very much at anything, so she did not answer, but sat still where she was, until the bull ran into the courtyard of the castle and knocked his great head against the door. The door was opened at once by a very splendid footman, who treated the Black Bull with great respect, and helped the princess to alight from his back. Then he ushered her into a magnificent hall, where the lord of the castle and his lady and a great and noble company were assembled, while the Black Bull trotted off quite contentedly to the grassy park which stretched all round the building, to spend the night there. The lord and his lady were very kind to the princess, and gave her her supper, and led her to a richly furnished bedroom, all hung round with golden mirrors, and left her to rest there. And in the morning, just as the Black Bull came trotting up to the front door, they handed her a beautiful apple, telling her not to break it, but to put it in her pocket, and keep it till she was in the greatest strait that mortal could be in. Then she was to break it, and it would bring her out of it. So she put the apple in her pocket, and they lifted her once more onto the Black Bull's back, and she and her strange companion continued on their journey. All that day they traveled, far further than I can tell you, and at night they came in sight of another castle, which was even bigger and grander than the first. "That's where we maun bide this night," said the Black Bull, "for that is the home of another of my brothers." And here the princess rested for the night, in a very fine bedroom indeed, all hung with silken curtains, and the lord and lady of the castle did everything to please her and make her comfortable. And in the morning, before she left, they presented her with the largest pear that she had ever seen, and warned her that she must not break it until she was in the direst strait that she had ever been in, and then, if she broke it, it would bring her out of it. The third day was the same as the other two had been. The princess and the Black Bull of Norroway rode many a weary mile, and at sundown they came to another castle, more splendid by far than the other two. This castle belonged to the Black Bull's youngest brother, and here the princess abode all night, while the bull, as usual, lay outside in the park. And this time, when they departed, the princess received a most lovely plum, with the warning not to break it till she was in the greatest strait that mortal could be in. Then she was to break it, and it would set her free. On the fourth day, however, things were changed, for there was no fine castle waiting for them at the end of their journey. On the contrary, as the shadows began to lengthen, they came to a dark, deep glen, which was so gloomy and so awesome looking that the poor princess felt her courage sinking as they approached it. At the entrance the Black Bull stopped. "Light down here, lady," he said, "for in this glen a deadly conflict awaits me, which I must face unaided and alone, for the dark and gloomy region that lies before us is the abode of a great spirit of darkness, who worketh much ill in the world. I would fain fight with him and overcome him, and by my troth I have good hope that I shall do so. As for thee, thou must seat thyself on this stone, and stir neither hand nor foot nor tongue till I return. For if thou but so much as move, then the evil spirit of the glen will have thee in his power." "But how shall I know what is happening to thee?" asked the princess anxiously, for she was beginning to grow quite fond of the huge black creature that had carried her so gallantly these last 4 days. "If I have neither to move hand nor foot, nor yet to speak?" "Thou wilt know by the signs around thee," answered the bull, "for if everything about thee turn blue, then thou wilt know that I have vanquished the evil spirit, but if everything about thee turn red, then the evil spirit hath vanquished me." With these words he departed, and was soon lost to sight in the dark recesses of the glen, leaving the little princess sitting motionless on her stone, afraid to move so much as her little finger, in case some unknown evil fell upon her. At last, when she had sat there for well nigh an hour, a curious change began to pass over the landscape. First it turned gray, and then it turned a deep azure blue, as if the sky had descended on the earth. "The bull hath conquered," thought the princess. "Oh, what a noble animal he is!" And in her relief and delight she moved her position, and crossed one leg over the other. Oh, woe a day! In a moment a mystic spell fell upon her, which caused her to become invisible to the eyes of the Prince of Norroway, who, having vanquished the evil spirit, was loosed from the spell which had lain over him, and had transformed him into the likeness of a great black bull, and who returned in haste down the glen to present himself in his rightful form to the maiden whom he loved, and whom he hoped to win for his bride. Long, long he sought, but he could not find her, while all the time she was sitting patiently waiting on the stone. But the spell was on her eyes also, and hindered her seeing him, as it hindered him seeing her. So she sat on and on till at last she became so wearied and lonely and frightened that she burst out crying, and cried herself to sleep. And when she woke in the morning she felt that it was no use sitting there any longer, so she rose and took her way, hardly knowing where she was going. And she went, till at last she came to a great hill made all of glass, which blocked her way and prevented her going any further. She tried time after time to climb it, but it was all of no avail, for the surface of the hill was so slippery that she only managed to climb up a few feet, to slide down again the next moment. So she began to walk round the bottom of the hill, in the hope of finding some path that would lead her over it. But the hill was so big and she was so tired that it seemed almost a hopeless quest, and her spirit died completely within her. And as she went slowly along, sobbing with despair, she felt that if help did not come soon, she must lie down and die. About midday, however, she came to a little cottage, and beside the cottage there was a smithy, where an old smith was working at his anvil. She entered and asked him if he could tell her of any path that would lead her over the mountain. The old man laid down his hammer and looked at her, slowly shaking his head as he did so. "Na, na, lassie," he said, "there is no easy road over the mountain of glass. Folk maun either walk round it, which is not an easy thing to do, for the foot of it stretches out for hundreds of miles, and the folk who try to do so are almost sure to lose their way. Or they maun walk over the top of it, and that can only be done by those who are shod with iron shoon." "And how am I to get these iron shoon?" cried the princess eagerly. "Couldst thou fashion me a pair, good man? I would gladly pay thee for them." Then she stopped suddenly, for she remembered that she had no money. "These shoon cannot be made for siller," said the old man solemnly. "They can only be earned by service. I alone can make them, and I make them for those who are willing to serve me." "And how long must I serve thee ere thou makest them for me?" asked the princess faintly. 7 years, replied the old man, "for they be magic shoon, and that is the magic number." So, as there seemed nothing else for it, the princess hired herself to the smith for 7 long years, to clean his house and cook his food and make and mend his clothes. At the end of that time he fashioned her a pair of iron shoon, with which she climbed the mountain of glass with as much ease as if it had been covered with fresh green turf. When she had reached the summit and descended to the other side, the first house that she came to was the house of an old washerwoman, who lived there with her only daughter. As the princess was now very tired, she went up to the door and knocked, and asked if she might be allowed to rest there for the night. The washerwoman, who was old and ugly, with a sly and evil face, said that she might, on one condition, and that was that she should try to wash a white mantle that the Black Knight of Norroway had brought to her to wash, as he had got it stained in a deadly fight. "Yestreen I spent the livelong day washing it," went on the old dame, "and I might as well have let it lie on the table, for at night when I took it out of the wash-tub, the stains were there as dark as ever. Peradventure, maiden, if thou wouldst try thy hand upon it, thou mightest be more successful, for I am loath to disappoint the Black Knight of Norroway, who is an exceedingly great and powerful prince." "Is he in any way connected with the Black Bull of Norroway?" asked the princess, for at the name her heart had leaped for joy, for it seemed that mayhap she was going to find once more him whom she had lost. The old woman looked at her suspiciously. "The two are one," she answered, "for the Black Knight chanced to have a spell thrown over him, which turned him into a black bull, and which could not be lifted until he had fought with and overcome a mighty spirit of evil that lived in a dark glen. He fought with the spirit and overcame it, and once more regained his true form. But 'tis said that his mind is somewhat clouded at times, for he speaketh ever of a maiden whom he would fain have wedded and whom he hath lost, though who or what she was no living person kens. But this story can have no interest to a stranger like thee," she added slowly, as if she were sorry for having said so much. "I have no more time to waste in talking, but if thou wilt try and wash the mantle, thou art welcome to a night's lodging, and if not, I must ask thee to go on thy way." Needless to say, the princess said that she would try to wash the mantle, and it seemed as if her fingers had some magic power in them, for as soon as she put it into water the stains vanished, and it became as white and clean as when it was new. Of course the old woman was delighted, but she was very suspicious also, for it appeared to her that there must be some mysterious link between the maiden and the knight, if his mantle became clean so easily when she washed it, when it had remained soiled and stained in spite of all the labor which she and her daughter had bestowed upon it. So, as she knew that the young gallant intended returning for it that very night, and as she wanted her daughter to get the credit of washing it, she advised the princess to go to bed early, in order to get a good night's rest after all her labors. And the princess followed her advice, and thus it came about that she was sound asleep, safely hidden in the big box bed in the corner, when the Black Knight of Norroway came to the cottage to claim his white mantle. Now you must know that the young man had carried about this mantle with him for the last 7 years, ever since his encounter with the evil spirit of the glen, always trying to find someone who could wash it for him, and never succeeding. For it had been revealed to him by a wise woman that she who could make it white and clean was destined to be his wife, be she bonny or ugly, old or young, and that, moreover, she would prove a loving, a faithful, and a true helpmeet. So when he came to the washerwoman's cottage and received back his mantle, white as the driven snow, and heard that it was the washerwoman's daughter who had wrought this wondrous change, he said at once that he would marry her, and that the very next day. When the princess awoke in the morning and heard all that had befallen, and how the Black Knight had come to the cottage while she was asleep, and had received his mantle and had promised to marry the washerwoman's daughter that very day, her heart was like to break, for now she felt that she never would have the chance of speaking to him and telling him who she really was. And in her sore distress she suddenly remembered the beautiful fruit which she had received on her journey 7 long years before, and which she had carried with her ever since. "Surely I will never be in a sorer strait than I am now," she said to herself. And she drew out the apple and broke it, and lo and behold, it was filled with the most beautiful precious stones that she had ever seen, and at the sight of them a plan came suddenly into her head. She took the precious stones out of the apple, and putting them into a corner of her kerchief, carried them to the washerwoman. "See," said she, "I am richer than mayhap thou, daughter, thoughtest I was, and if thou wilt, all these riches may be thine." "And how could that come about?" asked the old woman eagerly, for she had never seen so many precious stones in her life before, and she had a great desire to become the possessor of them. "Only put off thy daughter's wedding for 1 day," replied the princess, "and let me watch beside the Black Knight as he sleeps this night, for I have long had a great desire to see him." To her astonishment, the washerwoman agreed to this request, for the wily old woman was very anxious to get the jewels, which would make her rich for life, and it did not seem to her that there was any harm in the princess's request, for she had made up her mind that she would give the Black Knight a sleeping draught, which would effectually prevent him as much as speaking to this strange maiden. So she took the jewels and locked them up in her kist, and the wedding was put off, and that night the little princess slipped into the Black Knight's apartment when he was asleep, and watched all through the long hours by his bedside, singing this song to him in the hope that he would awake and hear it. "7 lang years I served for thee, the glassy hill I clamb for thee, though mantle white I washed for thee, and wilt thou no waken and turn to me?" But although she sang it over and over again, as if her heart would burst, he neither listened nor stirred, for the old washerwoman's potion had made sure of that. Next morning, in her great trouble, the little princess broke open the pear, hoping that its contents would help her better than the contents of the apple had done. But in it she found just what she had found before, a heap of precious stones. Only they were richer and more valuable than the others had been. So, as it seemed the only thing to do, she carried them to the old woman and bribed her to put the wedding off for yet another day, and allow her to watch that night also by the Black Prince's bedside. And the washerwoman did so. "For," said she, as she locked away the stones, I shall soon grow quite rich at this rate." But alas, it was all in vain that the princess had spent the long hours singing with all her might. "7 lang years I served for thee, the glassy hill I climbed for thee, the mantle white I washed for thee, and wilt thou no waken and turn to me?" For the young prince whom she watched so tenderly remained deaf and motionless as a stone. By the morning she had almost lost hope, for there was only the plum remaining now, and if that failed, her last chance had gone. With trembling fingers she broke it open and found inside another collection of precious stones, richer and rarer than all the others. She ran with these to the washerwoman, and throwing them into her lap, told her that she could keep them all and welcome if she would put off the wedding once again, and let her watch by the prince for one more night. And, greatly wondering, the old woman consented. Now it chanced that the Black Knight, tired with waiting for his wedding, went out hunting that day with all his attendants behind him. And as the servants rode, they talked together about something that had puzzled them sorely these 2 nights gone by. At last an old huntsman rode up to the knight with a question upon his lips. "Master," he said, "we would fain ken who the sweet singer is who singeth through the night in thy chamber." "Singer?" he repeated. "There is no singer. My chamber hath been as quiet as the grave, and I have slept a dreamless sleep ever since I came to live at the cottage." The old huntsman shook his head. "Taste not the old wife's draught this night, master," he said earnestly. "Then wilt thou hear what other ears have heard." At other times the Black Knight would have laughed at his words, but today the man spoke with such earnestness that he could not but listen to them. So that evening, when the washerwoman, as was her wont, brought his sleeping draught of spiced ale to his bedside, he told her that it was not sweet enough for his liking, and when she turned and went to the kitchen to fetch some honey to sweeten it, he jumped out of bed and poured it all out of the window, and when she came back he pretended that he had drunk it. So it came to pass that he lay awake that night, and heard the princess enter his room, and listened to her plaintive little song, sung in a voice that was full of sobs. "7 lang years I served for thee, the glassy hill I climbed for thee, the mantle white I washed for thee, and wilt thou no waken and turn to me?" And when he heard it, he understood it all, and he sprang up and took her in his arms and kissed her, and asked her to tell him the whole story. And when he heard it, he was so angry with the old washerwoman and her deceitful daughter that he ordered them to leave the country at once, and he married the little princess, and they lived happily all their days. And the wee bannock. Some tell about their sweethearts, how they tirled them to the winnock, but I'll tell you a bonny tale about a good oatmeal bannock. There was once an old man and his wife who lived in a dear little cottage by the side of a burn. They were a very canty and contented couple, for they had enough to live on and enough to do. Indeed, they considered themselves quite rich, for besides their cottage and their garden, they possessed 2 sleek cows, 5 hens and a cock, an old cat and 2 kittens. The old man spent his time looking after the cows and the hens and the garden, while the old woman kept herself busy spinning. One day, just after breakfast, the old woman thought that she would like an oatmeal bannock for her supper that evening. So she took down her bake-board and put on her girdle and baked a couple of fine cakes. And when they were ready, she put them down before the fire to harden. While they were toasting, her husband came in from the byre and sat down to take a rest in his great armchair. Presently his eyes fell on the bannocks, and as they looked very good, he broke one through the middle and began to eat it. When the other bannock saw this, it determined that it should not have the same fate. So it ran across the kitchen and out of the door as fast as it could. And when the old woman saw it disappearing, she ran after it as fast as her legs would carry her, holding her spindle in one hand and her distaff in the other. But she was old and the bannock was young, and it ran faster than she did, and escaped over the hill behind the house.
It ran and it ran and it ran until it came to a large newly thatched cottage, and as the door was open it took refuge inside, and ran right across the floor to a blazing fire, which was burning in the first room it came to. Now it chanced that this house belonged to a tailor, and he and his 2 apprentices were sitting cross-legged on the top of a big table by the window, sewing away with all their might, while the tailor's wife was sitting beside the fire, carding lint. When the wee bannock came trundling across the floor, all 3 tailors got such a fright that they jumped down from the table and hid behind the master tailor's wife. "Hoot!" she said, "what a set of cowards ye be! 'Tis but a nice wee bannock. Get hold of it and divide it between you, and I'll fetch you all a drink of milk." So she jumped up with her lint and her lint cards, and the tailor jumped up with his great shears, and one apprentice grasped the line measure, while another took up the saucer full of pins, and they all tried to catch the wee bannock. But it dodged them round and round the fire, and at last it got safely out of the door and ran down the road, with one of the apprentices after it, who tried to snip it in 2 with his shears. It ran too quickly for him, however, and at last he stopped and went back to the house, while the wee bannock ran on until it came to a tiny cottage by the roadside. It trundled in at the door, and there was a weaver sitting at his loom, with his wife beside him winding a clue of yarn. "What's that, Tibby?" said the weaver, with a start as the little cake flew past him. "Oh!" cried she in delight, jumping to her feet. "'Tis a wee bannock! I wonder where it came from." "Dinna bother your head about that, Tibby," said her man, "but grip it, my woman, grip it." But it was not so easy to get hold of the wee bannock. It was in vain that the good wife threw her clue at it, and that the good man tried to chase it into a corner and knock it down with his shuttle. It dodged and turned and twisted like a thing bewitched, till at last it flew out at the door again and vanished down the hill, "for all the world," as the old woman said, "like a new tarred sheep or a daft cow." In the next house that it came to, it found the good wife in the kitchen kerning. She had just filled her kern, and there was still some cream standing in the bottom of her cream jar. "Come away, little bannock," she cried when she saw it. "Thou art come in just in the nick of time, for I'm beginning to feel hungry, and I'll have cakes and cream for my dinner." But the wee bannock hopped round to the other side of the kern, and the good wife after it, and she was in such a hurry that she nearly upset the kern, and by the time that she had put it right again, the wee bannock was out at the door and halfway down the brae to the mill. The miller was sifting meal in the trough, but he straightened himself up when he saw the little cake. "It's a sign of plenty when bannocks are running about with no one to look after them," he said. "But I like bannocks and cheese, so just come in and I will give thee a night's lodging." But the little bannock had no wish to be eaten up by the miller, so it turned and ran out of the mill, and the miller was so busy that he did not trouble himself to run after it. After this it ran on and on and on till it came to the smithy, and it popped in there to see what it could see. The smith was busy at the anvil making horseshoe nails, but he looked up as the wee bannock entered. "If there be one thing I am fond of, it is a glass of ale and a well-toasted cake," he cried. "So come in by here and welcome to ye." But as soon as the little bannock heard of the ale, it turned and ran out of the smithy as fast as it could, and the disappointed smith picked up his hammer and ran after it. And when he saw that he could not catch it, he flung his heavy hammer at it in the hope of knocking it down, but luckily for the little cake he missed his aim. After this the bannock came to a farmhouse with a great stack of peat standing at the back of it. In it went and ran to the fireside. In this house the master had all the lint spread out on the floor, and was cloving it with an iron rod, while the mistress was heckling what he had already cloven. "Oh, Janet!" cried the good man in surprise. "Here comes a little bannock. It looks rare and good to eat. I have one half of it." "And I'll have the other half," cried the good wife. "Hit it over the back with your cloven stick, Sandy, and knock it down. Quick, or it'll be out at the door again." But the bannock played joke about and dodged behind a chair. "Hoot!" cried Janet contemptuously, for she thought that her husband might easily have hit it, and she threw her heckle at it. But the heckle missed it just as her husband's clothing rod had done, for it played joke about again and flew out of the house. This time it ran up a burnside till it came to a little cottage standing among the heather. Here the goodwife was making porridge for the supper in a pot over the fire, and her husband was sitting in a corner, plaiting ropes of straw with which to tie up the cow. "Oh, Jock, come here, cried the goodwife. "Thou art aye crying for a little bannock for thy supper. Come here, hasty, quick, and help me to catch it." "Aye, aye," assented Jock, jumping to his feet and hurrying across the little room. "But where is it? I cannot see it." "There, man, there!" cried his wife. "Under that chair. Run thou to that side, I will keep to this." So Jock ran into the dark corner behind the chair. But in his hurry he tripped and fell, and the wee bannock jumped over him and flew laughing out at the door. Through the winds and up the hillside it ran, and over the top of the hill to a shepherd's cottage on the other side. The inmates were just sitting down to their porridge, and the goodwife was scraping the pan. "Save us and help us!" she exclaimed, stopping with a spoon halfway to her mouth. "There's a wee bannock come in to warm itself at our fireside." "Sneck the door!" cried the husband, "and we'll try to catch it. It will come in handy after the porridge." But the bannock did not wait until the door was sneckit. It turned and ran as fast as it could, and the shepherd and his wife and all the bairns ran after it, with their spoons in their hands, in hopes of catching it. And when the shepherd saw that it could run faster than they could, he threw his bonnet at it and almost struck it, but it escaped all these dangers, and soon it came to another house where the folk were just going to bed. The good man was half undressed, and the good wife was raking the cinders carefully out of the fire. "What's that?" said he, "for a bowl of brose that I had at supper time wasna very big." "Catch it then," answered his wife, "and I'll have a bit too. Quick, quick, throw your coat over it, or it'll be away." So the good man threw his coat right on the top of the little bannock, and almost managed to smother it, but it struggled bravely and got out, breathless and hot, from under it. Then it ran out into the grey light again, for night was beginning to fall, and the good man ran after it without his coat. He chased it and chased it through the stackyard and across the field, and in amongst a fine patch of whins. Then he lost it, and as he was feeling cold without his coat, he went home. As for the poor little bannock, it thought that it would creep under a whin bush and lie there till morning, but it was so dark that it never saw that there was a fox's hole there. So it fell down the fox's hole, and the fox was very glad to see it, for he had had no food for 2 days. "Oh, welcome, welcome!" he cried, and he snapped it through the middle with his teeth, and that was the end of the poor wee bannock. And if a moral be wanted for this tale, here it is, that people should never be too uplifted or too cast down over anything, for all the good folk in the story thought that they were going to get the bannock, and lo and behold, the fox got it after all.